The first explosion turned the horizon into a sunrise of fire. Sand and static roared through the comms as plasma bolts chewed through the ridge. Viral 9's sky, normally the color of rust, burned white as the Joint Strike Team dove for cover. Screams and alien curses mixed with the hiss of leaking air suits. "Medic! Medic!" someone yelled. The squad's med officers were already on their knees, chrome trauma pods unfolding around them. Instruments hovered in synchronized arcs, laser sutures, bone printers, plasma injectors, 200 tools for every kind of injury the galaxy had ever seen. Then Sergeant Mason Cole came sliding down the slope. His rifle was gone, his armor was cracked, and in his hand was a roll of duct tape. He hit the ground beside a wounded alien whose breathing suit was hissing open like a burst lung. The medics froze, horrified, as the human tore the suit wider, pressed his palm over the hole, and ripped off a strip of tape with his teeth. "Don't!" one alien shouted. "That's unsanitary." Mason slapped the strip over the breach, pressed hard, and waited. The hiss stopped, the vitals stabilized. He sat back, panting, eyes hard. Unsanitary's better than dead. The alien medics stared, surrounded by 200 perfect tools, and one human, with a roll of silver tape that just outperformed all of them. And for the first time that day, the battlefield went quiet. 5 minutes earlier, the recon team had been advancing with tight formation across the plateau, just outside Crater Delta. It was supposed to be routine, a low-risk, pre-dawn sweep for potential movement near the central dome. Viral 9's surface was dead flat dust, good for clean visual reads. The ridge was just a minor elevation, until it wasn't. The blast hit first a ground shock concussion, followed by plasma fire from concealed positions higher up. It was a perfect setup. The ambushers knew the squad would bunch near the ridge's base for cover. 2 got hit before anyone even reacted. Rel, the Siroth comm specialist, collapsed on his side, chest plate melted halfway through, bubbles of green blood rising in his mask. His legs twitched. The second was Larna, a Machari scout, half organic, half cybernetic, fully down. A cable from her spine sparked against the dirt, twitching in time with her fading biosignal. Mason had been 10 meters back, finishing a perimeter scan when it hit. The flash lit up his visor. He hit the ground hard, rolled once, and came up covered in red dust and impact bruises. His HUD blinked, half-blind radiation pulse fried half the software. He tore the helmet off, squinted into the chaos, and bolted downhill. "Cole, back in formation," shouted the officer on comms. But Mason didn't answer. His boots pounded through smoke and grit. He dropped beside Rel and saw the suit fracture, pressure hissing out like air from a balloon. The alien medics were already on it, 3 of them. Their trauma kits opened like puzzle boxes, revealing trays upon trays of labeled instruments. Each tool adjusted automatically to environmental factors, humidity, pressure, even species-specific anatomy. But it was too slow. One medic struggled to interface with Rel's armor, while the other began prepping a thoracic decompression line. The third was still scanning vital signs. Mason didn't hesitate. He shoved the nearest medic aside, not roughly, but hard enough to get space. He gripped the torn suit, ripped the hole wider to see the breach, and unspooled a strip of tape. His hands moved fast. Press, seal, wrap, clamp with both palms. The hissing stopped. Rel's vitals, flashing red on 3 separate scanners, began to stabilize. The alien medic looked down at the tape like it was a primitive club. That's not medical grade," he said. Mason didn't even glance up. Neither's bleeding out on the ground. He checked Rel's pupils. Breath, circulation, everything he could by hand. He'd done battlefield triage before, not on a Siroth, true, but the principles held. Airflow, circulation, stabilize pressure, keep them alive long enough for evac. It was ugly, crude, uncertified, and it worked. He turned next to Larna. Her spinal interface was melting where the coolant line ruptured. A slow plume of fluorescent green vapor puffed from the cybernetic socket just under her shoulder blade. Sparks danced in rhythm with each breath. She was alive, barely. One of the medics moved in with a micro toolkit, surgical tweezers, fluid sealant, nanite sprays. Mason didn't wait. He slapped another length of duct tape over the rupture. then 2 more for reinforcement. The spark died instantly. The line held. Lorna coughed once, a short, mechanical choke, then took a steadier breath. "That's not an approved sealant," shouted the lead medic. "You could be compromising half her." "Yeah? And what were you doing?" Mason growled. "Analyzing her funeral?" The medic fell silent. Mason's hands shook. Not from fear, not exactly. From adrenaline, from the hard crash of going all in with nothing but instinct and silver tape. His palms were raw. His knee was bleeding from something sharp in the dust. He didn't even notice. Then, the second blast hit. A pressure wave blew straight across the field. One of the medbots went flying, skidding on its chassis, trailing smoke. The trauma unit it had been operating flew open, tools scattering like thrown silverware. One of its oxygen tanks hissed, the valve cracked and spurting gas. A medic screamed, "The circuit's compromised. It'll blow." Mason ran to it. No hesitation. He tore off another strip of tape and slapped it directly over the leak. It sizzled slightly, heat from the chemical discharge, but held. The hissing stopped. The pressure normalized. The medbot blinked back to green. That defies every known principle of polymer adhesion," the medic whispered. Mason just spat dust from his mouth and leaned against the wrecked trauma pod. "You think too much," he muttered. "We just make things stick." They sat in stunned silence for a few seconds. Plasma fire crackled in the distance. Another team was returning fire now. Suppression rounds echoed off the far ridge. Mason glanced over the squad. Rel was unconscious, stable. Larna was barely moving, but breathing. The third injured Tile, a massive Arcar engineer, had minor burns and a fractured limb joint. Mason crawled over, examined the exosuit crack, and nodded. "Crush injury?" he asked. "High kinetic impact. Bone stress likely," Till replied, teeth clenched. "All right, let's see how bad it is." He didn't guess. Mason ran a field scanner over the limb. No break. Just swelling and armor flex damage. He braced it with a rigid plate and more tape binding tight, but not enough to restrict blood flow. "Not pretty," Mason said, sitting back. "But you'll walk." Tile blinked at the silver cocoon on his leg. "That shouldn't be functional." "Well, it is." The tape had covered a punctured lung, a severed cybernetic line, a coolant leak, and now a crushed joint in under 12 minutes. And everything was holding. By the time command patched through again, Mason had cleaned and wrapped his own split knuckles with the same roll. The medic nearest him whispered, "Where do you even get that?" Mason held it up. "Hardware store, Earth, section near the zip ties." None of them knew what any of those words meant. But every single one of them would remember them. 2 hours after the ambush, the wind on Virel 9 shifted. What was once a baking stillness became a low, constant gust, whispering through glassed sand and scorched armor. The battlefield had quieted, not because the threat was gone, the ridge was still too hot to move past, but because survival had temporarily taken priority over tactics. A makeshift triage circle had formed in the lee of a broken boulder. The alien medics moved with renewed urgency now, though not without hesitation. Their trauma kits still gleamed in the dull light, their instruments still folded into perfect configurations on magnetic trays, but none of them touched Rel, Larna, or Tile. Mason did. His sleeves were torn to the elbow, and streaks of dried blood turned his forearms brown. He wasn't trained for this kind of medicine, not for alien anatomy, not for battlefield cybernetics. But after the chaos, after the tape held and the vitals stabilized, everyone had instinctively looked to him. It made him deeply uncomfortable. Mason sat with his back against a supply crate, finishing a hydration pouch with shaking hands. His knuckles throbbed beneath the tape, deeper bruising than he'd thought. Not broken, though, just angry. Across from him, Larna stirred. The tape along her back was holding, but the coolant system had only stabilized temporarily. The nanites inside her body weren't responding fully, probably due to cross-contamination from the heat. "Larna," he said quietly, crawling over, "don't move too much, you'll spike the coolant again." Her voice was faint but wry. "This material, what is it?" He pulled a half-used roll from his chest pouch and held it up. "Duct tape." "That's a stupid name." "Yep. So, I feel like I've been repaired by a child's toy." You're alive. I'm also overheating. He touched her shoulder carefully. It was hot, too hot for baseline function. Her internal fan array wasn't kicking in. She needed a coolant flush or a component swap, both things that should have required a sterile bay and half a day. Instead, Mason asked, "Can you open the auxiliary port?" She looked at him sideways, then nodded once. A segment of armor slid back with a hiss, revealing a dark socket and a tangle of microcables. Mason leaned in, eyes narrowing. "All right, I can work with this." He didn't have a cable splice. He didn't have a nano flush. What he had was 5 inches of thermal-resistant tape and a coil of power wire he'd scavenged from a shattered drone. He started carefully peeling the insulation, then used the dull side of his multi-tool to strip it. Not ideal. But then again, ideal had left the scene hours ago. With one hand, he gently redirected the cable loop, bypassing the burned-out conduit. The other hand wrapped the splice with tight, layered tape. "Are you improvising inside my back?" Lorna asked flatly. "Yes." "That's deeply invasive. I'll buy you a drink if we live." She didn't smile, but her vitals steadied, and a few seconds later, her cooling fan spun up. "Quiet. Functional." "You did it," she murmured. He didn't answer. Just sat back, eyes unfocused, adrenaline finally beginning to ebb. Across the triage circle, the lead alien medic, Yekat, watched it all. She had 12 cycles of trauma surgery training, specialized in 3 species cardiovascular systems, and could calibrate a bone printer mid-flight turbulence. Her certifications could fill a wall, but she hadn't saved Rel, or Larna, or the medbot, or the cracked air tank. She approached Mason as he rewrapped his bruised knee with a new strip of tape. His gloves were gone, his fingers were raw, nails dark with blood and grit. "You disregard sterilization," she said. He nodded once. "Your methods are unsupervised." "Yep." "Said it. You make decisions without anatomical mapping or thermal scan." "I do." She crouched in front of him. Her eyes, pale gold, flicked over his hands. "You're not supposed to be the reason they survived." He looked at her, exhausted. "You want them to be dead instead?" Yekat didn't answer. Instead, she set a fresh trauma scanner beside him, not as a challenge, a gesture. "You'll need better diagnostics." He blinked. That was close to a compliment. "I'll take it," he said. By the 4th hour, command confirmed that evac was inbound, but delayed surface storms were grounding all atmospheric craft. The squad had to hold position for another 6 hours. Air supplies were low, and one of the med tents was down. Mason took the opportunity to assess armor damage. Not his that could wait, but the hull of the portable power generator they'd salvaged from the scout unit. Its shielding was cooked on one side, exposing a delicate splice of circuits that had started to arc faintly with every power pulse. He opened the panel, saw the burn, swore under his breath. Yekat approached, watching him work. "Do you have a solder kit?" she asked. "No, do you?" She shook her head. He stared at the frayed wires, thought about it for a second. Then he reached into his side pouch and pulled out more duct tape. Yekat groaned audibly. "I am not watching you fix a power generator with that." "It's not just tape," Mason replied, as he used it to gently separate the conductors and insulate the vulnerable arcs. "It's heat-resistant, insulative, and flexible. It's literally better than half your tools in this dust." "You can't patch an energy system with human tape." "Sure I can. I'm not patching it. I'm isolating it. Huge difference." He wrapped the last bit, then flipped the panel closed. The hum of the generator steadied. The lights in the tent brightened by 5%. Yekat stared at him for a full 10 seconds. "You do realize you've just bypassed 3 safety protocols. Do you realize we're in the middle of a crater field with no air support?" She didn't respond, just turned and walked away, muttering something in her native language. Mason smiled faintly. That felt like another compliment. Night came in fast on Viral 9, not darkness, but a kind of swirling rust haze that dimmed the horizon and turned distance into smog. The squad hunkered low. Only a few sentries were posted. The rest focused on recovery and holding steady. Rel, heavily bandaged, was breathing steadily. Larna was sitting upright now, eyes half-lidded but lucid. Tile's leg was fully stabilized, though Mason insisted he keep pressure off it for another 12 hours. Nothing was rushed. No one was pushed to move. Mason's ribs hurt. He definitely bruised them on the slide down the ridge. He'd wrapped them earlier with a tight band, reinforced with tape. Not to heal, just to hold until real treatment came. He sat near the edge of the group, watching the stormlight flicker off the sand. Yekat joined him again. This time, she held something in her hands. It was a data tab, one of their standard field logs. She tapped the screen once. Command requested a full action record. I'm submitting our footage. Your interventions will be part of it. He didn't answer. I marked your actions under unconventional field improvisation. Mason gave a dry laugh. That's a polite way of saying, reckless duct tape cowboy. Yekat tilted her head. You're not a medic. Nope. But you saved 3 lives. I'm just stubborn. She looked at the silver tape, still visible on his arms, chest, and gear. What is this material really made of? He thought for a moment. Vinyl backing, rubber adhesive, some kind of weird human optimism. She stared at him. That last one is not measurable. Neither is what we just lived through. He tore another strip off and handed it to her. Keep it. She held it like a relic. Alien fingers turning the silver strip between them, baffled by something so simple, so absurd, and so effective. Above them, the wind howled across the crater. Inside the triage circle, duct tape clung to armor, tubing, and patchwork. Repairs silver bands like battle scars wrapped around the fragile systems keeping people alive. It wasn't supposed to work. But it did. By the 6th hour, the evac beacon pinged green on the squad's comms grid. ETA, 2 hours, the pilot reported. Make your way to Zone Kappa, hull integrity stable, minor surface scoring from upper atmosphere re-entry. Mason squinted at the coordinates, then swore softly. Zone Kappa was nearly a full kilometer southeast across open terrain, still lit intermittently by sniper fire. They'd be exposed the entire way. Lieutenant Dorvan, the unit's tactical lead, gathered the squad around a shallow rise for briefing. He was half buried in bandages from his own shoulder wound, which one of the medics had repaired with laser sutures and a printed dermal mesh. Mason couldn't help noticing that the wound looked cleaner than anything duct tape could have pulled off. Didn't matter. Half the people standing wouldn't even be vertical without him and his silver miracle. Moving wounded is priority, Dorvan said, voice gravelly through the haze. Rel and Tile get the grav lift. Larna, you think you can walk? I can try, she replied, but the auxiliary fan's stuck on medium. I'll overheat. Mason immediately stepped in. I can adjust that. I know the duct path now. Dorvan gave him a strange look, part disbelief, part appreciation, then nodded. Do it fast. Yekat hovered nearby, silent but watching. Mason knew she'd jump in the moment he crossed the line from field repair into outright reckless disassembly. He appreciated the oversight, actually. Made him double-check everything. Back at the crate where Larna sat, he unscrewed the external plate with a hand tool, carefully exposing the coolant fan system. One of the blades had warped during the earlier blast. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to unbalance the unit and throw the internal temp sensor into caution mode. He took the corner of a tape strip, pressed it flat against the out-of-alignment guide rail, and layered it until the fan nudged back into place with tension. He hit the power switch. The fan spun. Full speed. You're not fixing it, Yekat said from behind him, arms crossed. You're forcing it. That's right. You might burn it out. Or we walk out of here alive. That shut her up. The move to Zone Kappa was slow, deliberate. Rel and Teal floated on grav lifts, each accompanied by 2 squad members. Larna walked under her own power, Mason pacing beside her in case her systems flared again. Dust whipped sideways across the flats. The ridge fell behind them, a jagged scar marking the worst place any of them had ever stood. At the halfway point, a low pulse echoed across the plain, not an attack, but a mechanical whine. One of the grav lifts shuddered, dipped, and cut out mid-glide. Tile hit the ground hard. Not fatal, but enough to jolt his leg again. He roared. Mason sprinted over. The lift's main actuator was glowing with thermal stress, likely a delayed fault from earlier plasma heat. The field engineer, a Lakari named Vun, was already prying the casing open. "We don't have a backup. If this breaks..." Mason was already digging into his bag. "I've got something." No offense, Cole, but if you're about to pull out more tape." He pulled out more tape. Vun groaned audibly. "Why is that your only solution to everything?" "Because everything keeps breaking the fancy stuff." The wire harness had slipped inside the grav lift housing. He wrapped the loose conduit bundle tight, taping it down to the lift's internal rib. Then he reinforced the pressure actuator seal, which had hairline fractures from overheating, with a crisscrossed band of double-thick tape layers. He finished, slapped the power button. The lift hummed back to life. "Unbelievable," Vun muttered. Mason just shrugged. Sometimes, it's not about fixing everything. It's about holding it together long enough to matter. Tile, still wincing, gave him a grim nod. "Remind me to requisition a roll of that when we get back." By the time the squad reached the landing zone, the med shuttle had already descended. Its surface was matte black, scarred along the belly, where 2 plasma strikes had left twin craters in the plating. The pilot, a human this time, dark eyes and a narrow build, stood beside the loading ramp, shaking his head. "You're the Virel recon team?" he asked. "No way I can take off with this hull integrity. We're under 70%. Re-entry will rip the shuttle open." Mason climbed up beside him, peering at the gouges. One looked like it went clean through the outermost shielding. "Reinforced hull?" Mason asked. "Titanium ceramic blend, but it's cooked. Pressure seals won't hold." "Got sealant foam?" "No, and even if I did, the internal pressure would blow through the pack." Mason didn't wait for him to finish. He opened his pouch, pulled the roll, peeled off a strip. "You've got to be kidding me," the pilot said flatly. "You want to argue?" Mason asked. "Or you want to fly?" The pilot didn't answer, just stepped aside. Mason worked fast. He reinforced the outer lip of the breach with 2 layers, one to close the crack, one to bind the edges. Then he covered the second breach with overlapping strips, spiraling inward. Not just covering sealing, creating pressure resistance with brute geometry and stubborn adhesive. It wasn't elegant, but it was going to hold. The alien squad watched from below, speechless. Yekat murmured, "That isn't flight safe, is it?" The pilot ran a diagnostic scan. Readings turned from yellow to green. "Well," he muttered, "it says we're good to go," which is not possible. Mason climbed aboard last, chest heaving, face pale under layers of dust. His taped ribs ached with every step. But when the shuttle lifted, it didn't rattle. It soared. Once they hit upper atmosphere, the internal alarms stopped. Hull integrity held. Pressure was stable. No warning lights. The only sound was the low hum of the engines and the occasional cough from someone still coughing up Virel 9 grit. Larna sat beside Mason on the bench. Her shoulder twitched with each vibration. "You patched a space shuttle with silver tape," she said finally. "Yeah. Without tools." "Yup. And no one stopped you." "Hard to stop a guy with no other options." She didn't laugh, but there was something in her eyes, like someone re-evaluating an entire species based on one absurd afternoon. Across the aisle, Yekat was reviewing field footage. She paused, zoomed in on Mason's hands mid-repair. His fingers were bleeding slightly, right at the tips. She looked at the pilot. "What do humans call this condition?" "What condition?" "This behavior. The impulse to act, despite high personal risk. To use the wrong tools. To improvise with no logical outcome." The pilot chuckled, half serious. "We call it doing what needs to be done." Yekat tapped her tablet once, annotated the footage. She didn't say it out loud, but everyone who'd survived the ambush knew. Nothing about what happened should have worked, and yet it had. Because, while the alien medics had 200 perfect tools, Mason had the one thing none of them carried: the refusal to give up just because a solution didn't look polished. Silver tape, human grit, and the stubborn belief that nothing is ever truly broken. The med shuttle touched down on orbital base Tavara, with a hiss of venting gas and the low whine of gyros winding down. Above them, the massive docking arms rotated into position, magnetic clamps locking onto the shuttle's hull, still laced with silver streaks of duct tape, fluttering at the edges but holding firm. Mason exhaled only once the cabin lights switched from orange to soft white. Pressure stable. Oxygen normal. No one had ruptured mid-flight. Small victories. He was the last to stand. His joints popped as he pushed himself up from the bench, ribs aching under the tension bandage, or maybe just from sitting too long on cracked armor and willpower. The tape holding his armor together had started to peel at the corners. He let it. The job was done. Field medics swarmed the ramp as it dropped. Not the ones from Viral 9. These were base personnel, clean suits, proper stretchers, coordinated protocols. Their equipment gleamed, untouched by grit or desperation. Within seconds, Rel and Tile were whisked away to a medbay already prepared. Larna refused the stretcher and walked under her own power, assisted by a hovering stabilizer drone. Yeket waited at the bottom of the ramp. Mason descended slowly, one hand on the rail, each step rattling his ribs a little more. His legs worked, barely. His fingers were stiff and taped not just from bruising now, but from inflammation. He probably had a few stress fractures. He'd seen enough broken hands to recognize the signs. Yekat didn't say anything until he reached her. Then she extended a med tag. Treatment priority. You should have been first in. He blinked at the tag. I'm not critical. You're bleeding internally, your hand is compromised, and your hydration levels are low enough to trigger an alert on half our species' monitors. Still walking. She didn't smile, she never did, but she didn't retract the tag either. Let someone else tape you together for once. He took it. Reluctantly. They walked toward the med bay together. The halls were cool, metal-paneled, quiet, too clean for what they'd just lived through. You know, she said, glancing at him, we submitted the after-action report. Oh yeah? Mason asked. Where do I rank on the list of questionable decisions? Not questionable. Effective. Even the shuttle patch? Especially the shuttle patch. He huffed a laugh, then winced. That rib was definitely not going to forgive him soon. She tapped a panel, and the door to the medbay hissed open. A clean white room, monitors, tables, a strange peace, the kind only sterile walls could create. You'll be in recovery for at least a week, Yakat added. Longer if we follow standard human recovery charts. He stopped in the doorway. Let me guess, no duct tape allowed. Not in this wing. Figures. She paused, though, for the record, the data analysis teams are requesting samples of the adhesive, for research. Mason looked at her, one brow raised. Research? Field performance exceeded all known polymers. Durability under plasma-scorched conditions is currently unexplained. He couldn't help it. He grinned. It's tape, it's not a miracle. Your species appears to blur that line frequently. He walked into the room, slowly, sat on the edge of the diagnostic bed, letting the scanner arms begin their sweep. Cold light passed over his chest, his arms, his knees. Red rings flared briefly over his ribs and fingers. He didn't need to be told the results. Yekat watched as a med assistant prepped an IV and began attaching monitors. We cataloged your methods under emergency-level battlefield improvisation. That's bureaucratically flattering. There's a new tag in our medical supply database, item 001H. He turned his head. Seriously? She nodded once. Human tape. Performance, beyond reason. Mechanism, unknown. Status, essential. He laughed, then winced again. You filed that in an official report? I have video evidence. Command approved it? They've already requested logistics files for acquisition sources. Apparently, hardware store, Earth, wasn't specific enough. He leaned back on the bed, letting the diagnostic scan finish. Well, I guess I'm an arms dealer now. 3 days later, Mason stood in the base recovery lounge, arm in a sling, ribs wrapped under a loose-fitting recovery suit. His fingers were stiff but functional. The swelling had gone down enough to hold a coffee cup, which, to him, meant progress. Larna joined him near the viewport. Her systems were still cycling at reduced capacity, but she looked stronger. The tape he'd used on her shoulder was gone, replaced by something more refined, but the auxiliary port still bore a faint, sticky outline. They're rotating us out next cycle, she said. He nodded. Yeah. Heard command, wants to reevaluate joint mission risk factors. They're also reviewing battlefield repair protocols. I'd imagine they are. She looked at him for a moment. Do all humans improvise like that? He sipped his coffee. Not all. Some just panic and hide. Others try to hold things together with gum and hope. And you use tape. It's faster. A small silence passed between them. Then she reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a sealed pouch. What's this? He asked. New standard issue, she said. Field medics get 1 roll per deployment. He opened it. Silver, matte, familiar. He held it like a relic. You're joking. She shook her head. You changed the protocol. He stared at it. Not with amusement this time, but with something closer to awe, or guilt, or maybe just quiet reflection. All he'd done was hold people together. But sometimes, that was enough. Before he left for debrief, he stopped by the tech bay. The shuttle from Viral 9 had been repaired proper sealant now. No tape in sight, but someone had left a strip mounted in a clear case on the wall beside the hatch. Below it, a label. If it moves and shouldn't tape it. If it doesn't move and should more tape. He smiled. Then boarded the transport. He didn't take the roll with him. But he made sure to request 3 more in the next supply drop. Because you never know when the universe might fall apart. And someone has to be there with a little bit of tape and a whole lot of nerve to hold it together.